Since the start of the pandemic, state and local health departments have been trying to contain and monitor the spread of COVID-19 in communities through testing. But what if there was a way to get on top of a potential surge by going below?
Dozens of Wisconsin wastewater treatment facilities have been doing that now for 2 years, monitoring the coronavirus in the wastewater and giving communities an early warning for a potential outbreak. Schmidt 5 Brittany Schmidt tells us how it works and the potential for wastewater monitoring in the future.
40 million gallons each day.
That's how much wastewater New Water collects and treats every day.
We serve all of Brown County for the most part.
A large sample size to draw from as treatment operators collect a raw sample from the Green Bay and De Pere facility twice a week to send off for testing.
In the wastewater, what they're looking for is this novel coronavirus. And if you're infected or a community's infected, you'll start shedding the virus before you test positive.
With testing, there have been times where testing has been in short supply. People may not be able to get access to a test, and allows us to look at what's going on in the community independent of what people are doing in terms of whether they're getting tested or not.
Which means wastewater could give health departments an early indication if there's a COVID surge on the way before it shows up in case numbers or hospitalizations.
So it does provide kind of an early warning in terms of what may be coming.
All the data is published on the state's website. In Green Bay, it shows there's been a moderate decrease in COVID-19 earlier this month. In De Pere, it shows a major increase in COVID found in wastewater samples during the same time period.
I think what locals are looking for is really just another data source, another way to confirm what they think they're seeing in the community so they can take action if it's warranted in their own local communities.
The state plans to continue monitoring COVID-19 in wastewater for at least the next year. New Water plans to do it as well. In fact, monitoring COVID-19 in wastewater has opened the door to other possibilities, like looking at variants of COVID-19.
If we can help track that and potentially identify it one day through wastewater, that's yet another tool.
Or even precious metals, which is something New Water studied in 2018.
As I wash my hands every day, just a little bit of the gold off my ring is dissolved into the water.
They found 2,788 troy ounces of microscopic gold went through their facility, which is equivalent to $3 million at that time.
We don't know how to get it out cost effectively, but someday we hope we'll figure it out.
So until then, New Water will continue monitoring for COVID-19.
They'll put it in a refrigerator to preserve it and label it and send it off.
In Green Bay, Brittany Schmidt, Action 2 News.
Wow.
It's very interesting.
It really is. Pfizer has asked federal health officials to approve a fourth dose of its COVID-19 vaccine for people over the age of 65. Right now, only the immunocompromised are urged to get a fourth dose. So it begs the question, will everyone eventually be asked to get a fourth dose? In our First Alert Vaccine Team coverage, Brittany Schmidt tries to track down an answer.
Nearly 2 million coronavirus boosters have been given in the state, almost 700,000 of those into the arms of people 65 years or older. Now Pfizer is asking the FDA to approve a fourth dose for that same age group. But is it necessary?
Is this going to really boost our antibody levels enough to make the juice worth the squeeze?
Pfizer says real-world data from Israel shows infections and severe illness were lower in those who received a fourth dose.
It's not a done deal. I think this is something a lot of us are turning a very cautious eye to in the vaccine field. We don't like to give anything that's unnecessary in medicine. There's time and inconvenience and certainly a cost associated with it. As you said, Pfizer has other motivations potentially.
Which leads to another question. When does this start to turn into a yearly regimen, just like the flu shot?
That's a good question. I think there's two issues there. One is, do you need ongoing boosters like you need with tetanus every 10 years throughout your whole lifespan? Could this be a yearly shot? And then the second issue is whether or not the variants of COVID change, the strains change. And that's what goes on with flu. That's why there's a yearly flu shot is because the flu virus itself changes yearly, and we adapt the vaccine every year to accommodate that. So those two questions are unanswered yet.
If this is going to be an endemic illness, it may be something that we need to get every fall, just like we're supposed to get our flu shot every fall.
While doctors wait for more data and guidance, they are also keeping a close eye on Pfizer's vaccine trial for kids ages 6 months to 4 years old.
The hardest part for the science is that birth to 4 years is a huge amount of growth, and children that are 6 months are very different than children who are 4 years old.
I don't think we'll see anything, in the next month or two, but hopefully by midsummer.
Brittany Schmidt, Action 2 News.
As we talk about COVID-19 slowly becoming more of an endemic here in the U.S., word of two newly circulating variants causing some concern.
One of those variants, first reported in European countries as a hybrid, being called Deltacron, a combination of the Delta and Omicron variants. In a health alert, Brittany Schmidt tells us what we need to know now about these strains on the international radar.
Yes, we are aware of this recombinant. It's a combination of Delta AY.4 and Omicron BA.1.
Deltacron, that's the unofficial name given to a new variant, now on the World Health Organization's radar.
But there are very low levels of this detection.
So low that the study, which sequenced almost 30,000 COVID-19 samples throughout the U.S., only found 2 cases of the so-called Deltacron hybrid in the U.S.
It sort of proves the point that if you let these things circulate long enough, you'll find pieces and parts of various things.
Right now, researchers say there's no evidence it is more transmissible or severe. However, WHO says many studies are underway.
Unfortunately, we do expect to see recombinants because this is what viruses do. They change over time. We're seeing a very intense level of circulation. We are seeing this virus infect animals with the possibility of infecting humans again. So again, the pandemic is far from over.
As news of Deltacron spreads, another strain is back in circulation and catching doctors' attention. The subvariant of Omicron, also called the stealth variant, is causing surges in the UK and China.
That's really what we're watching, is that particular subvariant and how it sort of takes over for the original Omicron.
We cannot allow this virus to spread at such an intense level. It doesn't mean locking people down, locking people in their homes. It means using simple tools and a layered approach.
One of those tools you can use to monitor COVID-19 on a weekly basis is on the CDC website. They have a U.S. COVID-19 community levels by county map where you can monitor COVID throughout the entire nation. So if you're going on vacation, you know whether to wear a mask or just keep it in your back pocket. If you click on the map, you can go right to Wisconsin specifically, and if you go to Brown County, you can see that COVID-19 level. The spread is low right now, but let's say you're heading over to the west side of the state, let's say Barron County, there you can see that COVID-19 spread is medium. But the only true way to monitor spread or how the virus is changing is through PCR testing and genome sequencing, which may have taken a hit with the rise of at-home tests.
The really important part is just access to testing. And likely PCR testing will still kind of remain a main part of this, but you're right that without that, we really can't sequence a certain amount of them to tell, is the proportion changing or whatever.
So it's really critical that we have testing, and it's really critical that we continue with sequencing.
Brittany Schmidt, Action 2 News.
President Joe Biden back in isolation after testing positive for COVID-19 again over the weekend, with what experts are calling a rebound positivity. In today's Health Alert, Brittany Schmidt explains why this is not a new phenomenon.
We've known about these rebound cases from Paxlovid, going back all the way to May.
Paxlovid is an oral antiviral medication to treat COVID-19. It works by reducing the replication of the virus in the body, giving the immune system time to build up a response to eliminate the virus completely. But for some who took the antiviral, like President Joe Biden and infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci, it's not enough.
What happens is you test positive for COVID, you start your Paxlovid, you get better, you actually test negative, and then at some point, 2 to 8 days later, you usually have mild symptoms. Some people will have no symptoms, but you test positive again.
Age may be a factor, as President Biden is 79 years old and Dr. Fauci is 81 years old, both reporting similar rebound cases.
Brown County's community spread of COVID-19 is now back in the high category as the BA.5 Omicron variant continues to dominate, making up 70% of all infections worldwide. The FDA recently asked Pfizer and Moderna to create Omicron-specific booster vaccines for the fall as immunity starts to wane for millions not yet approved for a second booster dose. In a health alert, Brittany Schmidt tells us why we might see a hybrid booster this fall.
Now that Omicron is the dominant strain of COVID-19 in the United States, UW Health emergency physician Dr. Jeff Ponoff says he expects to see a hybrid booster this fall, meaning part of the vaccine would be the same as the boosters we've already experienced, that targets and preps the immune system to attack the original COVID strain that erupted in early 2020.
And the reason they would do that is we know that even though the ability to prevent any disease is lessened with that particular type of vaccine, it's still doing really well with protection against severe disease. So we don't want to lose that. We want to, at a minimum, ensure that people are less likely to get severely ill if they come in contact with COVID, even an Omicron strain.
Dr. Ponoff says the second portion of the vaccine would be new, containing particular instructions to attack the Omicron variant.
The idea behind this is that, you're guaranteed that long protection from that initial strain. That Omicron-specific strain may also give us protection against severe disease, but it probably should do a better job of preventing us from getting sick altogether when we come in contact with these Omicron strains.
He doesn't think the hybrid booster will offer as much protection as the original vaccine, where it was in the 90% range.
These Omicron strains are just really infectious and pretty good at invading immunity. But let's say we could get to, 80% protection for 6 months, 12 months, something like that. Well, that would be a nice, icing on top of the cake if we could have a booster that not only protects us against severe disease, but also protects us fairly well against getting sick at all.
In the long term, Dr. Ponoff sees COVID playing out like the flu, where we have a specific vaccine every year that targets the dominant strain. But he says we just aren't there yet.
We don't get like 5 or 6 different flu variants that come through every year like we do with COVID right now. If we decrease worldwide transmission of COVID, that rate of variant development will slow. And we will likely have one variant that's kind of like out there right now in that season that we develop the vaccine for, and then people get good protection. So, it might not wind up that way this year. Maybe next year we still have some pretty quick variants moving. But eventually we should see an easing of how quickly those variants develop.
Dr. Ponoff says vaccines will help. So if you are eligible to get a booster, he says you should do so because it won't disqualify you from getting the hybrid booster later this fall.
With the high levels of COVID in the community, I would get boosted because the eligibility right now is really based on the ability to protect against severe disease.
Brittany Schmidt, Action 2 News.
Antibiotic resistance is a growing world health crisis that could turn simple infections into deadly ones.
And experts say if we don't get a handle on antibiotics right now, we could be looking at more superbugs in the future that cannot be treated. In a health alert, Brittany Schmidt explains why now is the right time to have these conversations.
If you've ever been treated for a bacterial infection like strep throat or pneumonia, you are probably familiar with the term Z-Pak. At one point, it was the most commonly prescribed antibiotic in the U.S., but UW Health Dr. Michael Paglia says that has changed because of antibiotic resistance.
It used to be totally fine to use a Z-Pak for a pneumonia, and now you can't do that alone because it's just not effective anymore.
Dr. Paglia says over time, antibiotics become less effective in treating bacterial infections because bacteria adapts and mutates.
It's going to happen, it's just a matter of time. And sort of how much we're using the antibiotic is going to put pressure on that to drive that resistance development over time.
Dr. Paglia says overuse and misuse is putting other antibiotics at risk of being less effective too. Combine that with the lack of new antibiotics being discovered or created, and Dr. Paglia says it's alarming.
The fear that they've talked about in a lot of the national, WHO and CDC reports is they call it the post-antibiotic era. Which is absolutely terrifying. So that would mean that if somebody got like a simple infection after a routine surgery, that could be fatal because we'd no longer have antibiotics to treat that or to prevent infections during surgeries.
While researchers at UW-Madison and UW-Green Bay continue to look for solutions, Dr. Paglia says there's something you can do too. When you are prescribed antibiotics next time, ask questions. Yes, they may still be necessary, but you can look at options like duration and dosage.
Is this the most narrow spectrum antibiotic that I could be receiving for this infection? Is there any alternative treatments? Could we wait and see how I do? And if I improve, maybe I don't need it. And so there's some really important conversations that need to be had between patients and their providers around antibiotics and just sort of I just want to empower people to have that conversation and to bring it up and feel that it's okay to ask. That's the main thing.
I'm Brittany Schmidt for Action 2 News.